Another week in the books, another win for the Washington Commanders, and more records for Jayden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, everybody, to today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. Also find me contributing this year in writing to WUSA9.com, your local CBS affiliate in the Washington, D.C. area. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Locked On Commanders is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. If you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's show. I thank you for coming through today. Every dayers, a special thank you to you for coming through every single day. Today, we're going to talk about Dan Quinn's quote of the week. We're going to talk about Frankie Luvu getting a second game ball following the latest win over the Cleveland Browns. We've got 3 sustains, 3 improves for the Washington Commanders to make coming out of week 5, but we're going to start it all off with rookie quarterback Jayden Daniels continuing to make history. Terry McLaurin also getting in on that party. He's already made quite a bit himself, but he's getting into that party again this weekend. If you want to get even more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, sign up to be an insider today by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And from there, not only are you going to get exclusive text messages from me to you during games, press conferences, practices, all that kind of stuff, bonus content. You'll get links to exclusive insider-only Zoom meetings where we get together. We have a lot of conversation, just a bunch of people who are wanting to see the Washington Commanders win, hanging out for about 30 to 40 minutes once or twice a week. It's a lot of fun. Come through there. But you can also text me your thoughts, your questions. If there's something specifically you want to see on the program, you can contribute, share some ideas for the show, things like that. We got a film study episode coming up tomorrow, and I'm getting texts from insiders telling me what kind of film review they want to hear on the show. So that's a way you get to contribute to the show. So again, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Go beyond the 5 days a week and become an insider today. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. So this is our after action review episode that we do every single week. Win or lose, does not matter. We come through here and we look at what was supposed to happen and then what actually went down for the Washington Commanders. And what was supposed to happen is the Washington Commanders were supposed to win this game by 3 points. They were favored coming into this game to beat the Cleveland Browns by 3. They come out of it with a 21-point win. Just a massive performance from the Washington Commanders, big time performance from several players. I mean, obviously the key players, right? Jayden Daniels, one of those key players. Austin Eckler had a lot of good plays for this or for the offense on the defense. Terry McLaurin, another banner day for him, 100 yards plus receiving. Luke McCaffrey came up with the second most catches for this team, even though the yardage wasn't necessarily super high, 19 yards total on those 3 catches. Still very important to have those, especially that one super difficult. I still don't know how he made that catch, and I don't know if he could really tell you himself how he made it. Just, hey, ball was coming, put my hands in position, and went through the contact. The contact definitely got there early. De'Ami Brown, all De'Ami Brown does is catch deep passes for touchdowns, and on Sunday certainly did that with a 41-yarder. I think Zach Ertz probably comes out as the player that we kind of say, had the biggest struggle, right? Had a couple of drops, had that one play down in scoring position deep in Cleveland, in Cleveland's and in the red zone, where if it's ruled a catch, it's a fumble and it's a turnover. It would be the second red zone turnover of the day for the Washington Commanders. You don't want to see those things. Very uncharacteristic of a guy like Zach Ertz. So you expect that to be basically a one-off there. Finishes the day with 2 catches for 10 yards on 8 targets. And when you look at the fact that 6 of Jayden Daniels' incompletions come there, if you add even 4 of those incompletions as receptions, he's 18 for 25, and at 238 yards goes up to, I don't know what, at least 258, you imagine. So that's a much better day for the rookie, who still had a pretty good day. 85.1 passer rating at the end of the game. Not, the best of his career. I think second lowest of his career so far. And it's kind of interesting because you look at that, you're kind of like, it's not that great of a day for Jayden Daniels. And that really, what it does is actually it more shines a light on us and how spoiled we've been by this rookie's performance so far this year, instead of shining a light on him, because Jayden Daniels certainly doing a lot of good things. And speaking of good things, this is the first time that Washington has won a game by 21 points since, well, week 4. They won by 28. So it's actually becoming, well, I would say it's becoming a norm, right? But at least for 2 weeks, it became a norm. But look, this is the first 3-game stretch where the Washington Commanders have scored 30-plus points since 2005. So again, if you feel like you haven't seen this kind of football out of Washington in a while, you are correct. It's the first time since 1997. I got this question from an insider. First time since 1997 that when Washington beat the Chicago Bears 31-8 in week 10 of that season, then they beat the Detroit Lions 30-7 the following week. Both games won by 23 points or more. The first time since 1997 that 2 games back-to-back have been won by this big of a scoring margin. Washington is also 4-1 for the first time since 2008, 2-0 at home for the first time since 2011. 3 rushing touchdowns on Sunday was the first time that Washington has ran for 3 touchdowns in 3 straight games ever. No Washington Commanders fan has ever seen this 3-game performance on the ground. So congratulations. You are literally witnesses to franchise history. And Washington became the first team since 1970 to score 150 plus points in their first 5 games while starting a rookie quarterback. It's a lot of qualifiers, but it's still very impressive. Jayden Daniels, first rookie quarterback in NFL history to have 1,000 yards passing and 250 yards rushing in his first 5 NFL games. Just for reference, because just what we do, and the conversation's been going on out there. I've been hearing it, comparing him to Lamar Jackson. Not a fair comparison. No disrespect to Lamar, the MVP. No no higher expectations for a rookie quarterback in Jayden Daniels. But in Lamar Jackson, it took him 10 game appearances. I put it that way because he played in 5 games before he started in 5 games to get 1,000 yards, and also took 10 game appearances for him to hit 250 yards rushing. Now, in his first 5 starts, Lamar Jackson did have 250 plus yards rushing, but he had 731 yards passing. So even with the 5 games of little experience coming into his first 5 starts, Lamar Jackson's still not hitting those marks. So yes, Jayden Daniels is performing better than Lamar Jackson through each of their first 5 starts. For what that's worth, doesn't mean anything is guaranteed for the future, of course. But this game, not just about Jayden Daniels, right. Wide receiver Terry McLaurin passed Jerry Smith for 7th most receiving yards in franchise history in the win over the Cleveland Browns. He also reached 400 career receptions, which joins him with Santana Moss and Gary Clark as the only other Washington receivers to hit that mark within their first 6 seasons with Washington. And he did it on Santana Moss Day. I got to run into Santana on the field after the game, gave him a little bit of love for Santana Moss Day. You love to see it. Definitely a very deserving guy. McLaurin is now 268 yards from moving into 6th all-time in yards, which would pass rookie Sanders. Not likely to reach Bobby Mitchell this season to reach 5th in the franchise all-time list. He's still 906 yards away from that. But, I mean, never say never, right? It's certainly not like impossible. Just usually would be a little bit unlikely. His 401 receptions is 8th all-time in franchise history, and it puts him 13 shy of tying Ricky Sanders for 7th place, 20 shy of tying Jerry Smith for 6th place, and 28 shy of tying tight end Chris Cooley for 5th all-time. So 29 catches, and Terry McLaurin jumps from 8th place to 5th place all-time on the Washington franchise reception list. Pretty good chance that's going to happen as long as he stays healthy, knock on wood. With at least 2 sacks and a fumble recovery, Frankie Luvu became the first Washington player since Ryan Kerrigan, pass rush specialist, one of his coaches on the team. Ryan Kerrigan did it in 2020, had 2 sacks and a fumble recovery. Frankie Luvu, the first Washington defender to do the same thing. So a lot of things went down on Sunday against the Cleveland Browns. What do we want to see continuing forward into week 6 against the Baltimore Ravens? And what do we want to leave behind with that win against Cleveland in Northwest Stadium? That and more coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And the fact that FanDuel is America's #1 sports book is why you can get your big return, because if you're a new customer, you can get your bankroll started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats. You can view the play-by-play to break down how the game is going, and so much more on the exact same page that you can then wager on your hunch at FanDuel. Again, America's #1 sportsbook. So if you look at a game, you're like, man, it's third quarter, it's about a 10-point spread, but I think that the team who's trailing by 10 is going to come back here in this thing. By the way, the game flow is going. You can go to FanDuel, check out the game flow for yourself. And if you're super confident in that bet, place that $5 first bet. You'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Right now, the Washington Commanders are 6.5-point underdogs against the Ravens. If you want to take that action, either way, take full advantage of the latest opportunity by going to FanDuel.com and downloading America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders also brought to you by Hillsdale College. I want to welcome Hillsdale College to the sponsorship family. This episode brought to you by Hillsdale. And Hillsdale says that time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours on end. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Well, you can look at some history, some economics, the great works of literature, the meaning of the United States Constitution. Very important this time of year, I think. Did you study these things in school? Probably not. But if you did, maybe it's time for a refresher, right? Time and technology have changed a lot of things. They have not changed basic fundamental truths about the world and our place in it. Our sponsors, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including American foreign policy, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, and the history of classical music, Pythagoras through Beethoven. So go to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll today. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register today. Hillsdale.edu/lockedon. Continuing now with our episode of Locked On Commanders, our after action review. We just talked about what was supposed to happen, a little bit of what actually happened, and what happened while the Washington Commanders took down the Cleveland Browns. And as we do every single week, we've got 3 things to sustain, 3 things to improve. I do write this for CommanderGameDay.com on Sports Illustrated. We call it Stash and Trash over there. So if you want to go over there and check that out, by all means, please do. That's the reading version. This is the listening version where I'm just going to tell you about what I wrote over there. And I think the first stash, honestly, is kind of something that's already been getting stashed anyway. And it's the impact that outside linebacker Frankie Luvu has had this season. Now, talked to a couple of, multiple Commanders fans, some insiders, some not insiders, about Frankie Luvu's performances through week 1, through week 2. And there was a little bit of disappointment there from some people. Some people thought that he would be splashier right off the bat and kind of make bigger plays. But what I explained to all of those people, and I feel like they listened, pretty well, received the information pretty well, I should say, is he was making plays, regardless of what the stat box was saying. And you really got to look into it sometimes, because a guy like Frankie Luvu, what he's really good at is disrupting the offense. And sometimes that doesn't record in the stat box, right? Sometimes it comes down to him blowing up a screenplay in the sense where he attacks the center and the guard on a screenplay where that guard is supposed to be pulling to get in front of the receiving running back, usually, right? The screen back. And because Frankie Luvu is causing so much disruption in the middle of that play, that guy is not able to pull and get in front of it for his block. So when the screen happens, there's another Commander's defender there to blow it up. And what we see on the screen and what we see in the stat box is, oh man, this guy made a really great play, blew up this screen, didn't allow this team to do what they're trying to do. And yes, that's true. But what we don't usually see and what doesn't get recorded in the stat box is a guy like Frankie Luvu, and certainly other players as well, but Frankie Luvu specifically in this conversation, doing something that then trickles down and daisy chains into that being able to happen. So those are the types of plays that we saw Frankie Luvu making in weeks 1, in weeks 2. But then in the last few weeks, we've seen Frankie Luvu making plays that also record in the stat box, right? And that's a lot sexier, and that's a lot easier to celebrate, and everybody can see those types of things. And we want to continue to see those things. So my sustain number 1 is long live Luvu. I think that Frankie Luvu is going to be a challenger for Defensive Player of the Week this week. I think when you look at the other defensive players of the week so far, Frankie's missing the touchdown that some of those guys were missing. And, he wanted to return that fumble for a touchdown. I think if he returns that fumble for a touchdown, I'd probably say Frankie's a lock for Defensive Player of the Week. But even without that, 2.5 sacks that led to a total loss of 15.5 yards, 7 tackles. Frankie also came up with a lot of other stats we're going to go through here later in the episode. But he and Bobby Wagner combined for that fumble, forced fumble by Bobby, fumble recovery by Luvu. And that's Luvu's second fumble recovery of the season. So you just love seeing that as it comes. So again, Frankie Luvu, just lighten up the stat box, right? Frankie Luvu doing what Frankie Luvu does is going to happen anyway, but Frankie Luvu lighten up the stat box is always going to be better for the Washington Commanders win opportunity. So that's our first sustain. Our first improve It was going to be red zone turnover. And I know it was only one. And we did this last week, right? Jayden Daniels threw his first interception. I said, look, I know it's only one, and every quarterback's going to throw one, but you never want turnovers, right? There are 2 turnovers committed by the Washington Commanders offense on Sunday. One, a fumble by receiver Terry McLaurin, who was trying to get to the right side edge on the end around play, jet sweep, whatever. Everybody has a little bit of a different dynamic for it. But bottom line is, Jayden Daniels handed the ball to Terry McLaurin as he's in motion coming around the formation, trying to get to the right end. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah forced the fumble, and cornerback Martin Emerson was able to recover. It wasn't in the red zone, but I think the fumble happened at about the 30-yard line, so you're in scoring range. Certainly don't want to do that. But then you had the interception thrown by Jayden Daniels, his second in 2 games, second of his career. That interception comes in a scoreless game at the 1-yard line going into the Cleveland Browns end zone. Ultimately, the defense stands up, 3 and out, forces a punt. Commanders get really good field position, and they end up scoring anyway. So it's almost like a no harm, no foul. But at the end of the day, you don't want to contribute, or you don't want to continue to try to lean on your defense to turn your penalty, or your, why do I keep trying to say penalties, your turnovers into non-issues, right? You love the fact that you can do it, but you don't want to put your defense in that position over and over again. And certainly you want to come up with points. I think the broadcast said that the team had 19 straight drives in the red zone producing points up until that interception. So you want to get back on that streak as soon as possible. And especially against a team like Baltimore, you cannot give away points against a team like the Baltimore Ravens. So you certainly want to see those cleaned up. Relatively small, right, issues. But Dan Quinn said in his Zoom press conference on Monday, you're not going to win a lot of games if you're negative in the turnover department. So you definitely want to get those cleaned up. And again, with a team like the Baltimore Ravens coming up on the schedule, you definitely want to do that. So that's our first improve. Red zone turnovers in general. That's going to be an every week thing, but especially when we have 2 of them in one game, you got to talk about it. So improve, number 1 in the books. Sustain, number 2. Ground forces, right? This running back room just seems to get better, right? Like who would have thought that losing Austin Eckler to a concussion for a week would have actually eventually, certainly not in the short term, and you don't wish it on anybody. You definitely don't want to see it happen again, but eventually would actually become almost a catalyst for good news. Running back Brian Robinson Jr. isn't going to be happy about his individual contributions, or probably isn't happy about his individual contributions. 7 carries, 18 yards, 2 touchdowns, which is great. And if he's on your fantasy roster, like he's on mine, that's the only thing saving you from pulling your hair out. But coming into the game with an injury, the way that the game was going at halftime, the Washington Commanders made the very wise decision to not use him in the second half, right? He comes in banged up. He wasn't 100%. I don't know what percentage he probably was at. I think if you ask B-Rob if he wanted to play in the second half, absolutely wanted to play in the second half, right? Because that's just B-Rob. But I think the Washington Commanders made the smart decision. But when you look at this trio of running backs, and honestly, that's where this concussion from Austin Eckler, having to lean on Jeremy McNichols against the Arizona Cardinals, showed them that they can lean on Jeremy McNichols. So when Brian Robinson comes into this game banged up, dealing with a little bit of an injury, and you've got the game, kind of under control entering in the second half, you can then turn to the combination of Austin Eckler and Jeremy McNichols. And let's be honest here, running backs are one of the most, volatile positions in the NFL. Like, those guys get injured, unfortunately, a lot. Knock on wood, it doesn't happen. But you also need to know, can we survive? Can this running game function with Austin Eckler and Jeremy McNichols if we lose B-Rob for a game or 2? Knock on wood, it doesn't happen. And they combined, the 3 of them, for 20 carries, 129 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That is how you spell domination. Like, for as much as Jayden Daniels came off of one of his record-setting paths, right? He's on several record-setting paths. But as much as Jayden Daniels' completion percentage came down, and there have been some fans who pointed out, like, the Cleveland Browns defense is really good, and they really are. So that kind of showed, that's kind of the reason why his numbers kind of came back down to earth a little bit, but still a very good performance, still a good enough performance to get a win over a pretty solid defense. So having this type of rushing attack to go against that defense, incredibly important. It's going to be incredibly important moving forward against the Baltimore Ravens this weekend as well. So as long as Washington keeps getting production like that out of its backfield, the real wins are still going to keep coming, even if the fantasy wins don't. Because, Brian Robinson doesn't get those 2 touchdowns, you're looking at a pretty ugly day in fantasy if you're a Brian Robinson person like I am. But again, that's fantasy. Focus on the reality. And so that's our say number 2, ground forces. You want to keep those things coming. Improve number 2, ground defense. So we're going to flip it on to the other side here. The Commanders' defense has clearly improved over the last few weeks. Tackling has gotten much better. We talked about that on our episode yesterday. However, on Sunday, the defense did allow Cleveland Browns running back Jerome Ford to have a 5.2 yards per carry average. Deontay Foreman, a 4.9 yards per rush average. And currently the Commanders defense is 31st in rush defense in yards per play. There's no yeah buts. You can't say, yeah, but they won by this much. Yeah, but it didn't really hurt them. Yeah, but this, because Derrick Henry is coming in week 6. There's no yeah buts. You got to get that secured before next weekend. Our final sustain is we are number 2. Shout out to the upcoming movie Venom, where they do the whole we thing for symbiotes. Terry McLaurin is the number 1 receiver. Everybody else is the number 2 receiver. De'Ami Brown, second leading receiver in this game with 57 yards. Luke McCaffrey, second leader in receptions with 3 yards. De'Ami Brown also scored the touchdown, obviously. Last week, it was Olamide Zaccheaus. The week before that, it was Luke McCaffrey. Noah Brown came up with clutch catches. The bottom line is Washington Commanders' number 2 receiver is everybody else after Terry McLaurin. Improved number 3, pass rush pacificity. In the first 2 weeks of the NFL season, we saw, or the first 3 weeks of the NFL season, this Washington Commanders defense got to opposing quarterbacks 4 times. In week 4, they got to Kyler Murray 4 times. In week 5, they got to Deshaun Watson 7 times, 4 of those coming on third downs. You want to see that continuing up until the end of the season, but especially against a guy like Lamar Jackson coming up in week 6. Coming up next, we're going to hear from head coach Dan Quinn, and we're going to hand out our fan-voted game ball on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that thanks to our next sponsor for today's episode, and that is Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Whether it's concerts, games, theater, whatever it is, you can get your tickets easier from Game Time Picks. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets yourself. Curated deals make it easier to find the best price on the best seats. For example, my Game Time Picks right now show me tickets to see the Chicago Bears visit the Washington Commanders for $126, or I can see the New Jersey Devils visiting the Washington Capitals for $31. All in pricing, I toggle that on the app, and I get all my pricing with taxes, all that stuff included up front, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying your concert tickets, your game tickets, whatever live event ticket you need with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we talked about what was supposed to happen, and we talked about a lot of history being made by Jayden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, this team, just in general, some things that football fans have literally never seen, Commanders fans have literally never seen, things we haven't seen from Washington since the 90s, since I was a teenager. And then we talked about 3 things we want to see bleed over from week 5 to week 6, 3 things we want to see left behind in week 5. We'll see what happens coming up tomorrow. We'll have our film review. I've got some requests from some insiders already on some things we're going to try. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, it's hard to do a film review of offensive line play, but we're going to try because I can't show you on the show. We've got licensing laws, and here at the Locked On Podcast Network, we follow the rules. So I can't show you. So I'm going to do my best to describe them to you. We're also going to do some other film study on some other players, some other positions as well. So hopefully you come back for that. It should be a good time. Either way, I always love watching film. Always love communicating as much as possible on the little that I think I know about watching film. So hopefully you come through for that. Dan Quinn knows a lot about watching film. He knows a lot about coaching in the National Football League. And my favorite quote from Dan Quinn following the Week 5 win over the Cleveland Browns was on those subtle ways that the defense has grown in the last week or two. And he said, quote, tackling, I would say would be the biggest one for me. I think on the day, we might have been at 4, talking about missed tackles, and we had been in double digits in previous games. And so that part, when you have a game where you can tackle, it means our tracking is getting better, the technique to go through that. I love the energy that our special teams groups are bringing in terms of the coverage aspect. And on those ones, those are tackling opportunities too. So I think the more that we're doing this, the better the tackling is becoming, end quote. And I could not agree with Coach Quinn more. And I picked this quote not just because it makes me right, because I talked about this in the post-game episode. If you're an everyday, you came through for the post-game episode, you know I really harped on the improvement in tackling on the defense as well. Insiders we talked about in our post-episode Zoom conference as well. So yes, it proves me right. But listen, this wasn't up for debate, right? Like the Washington Commanders clearly have gotten better at defense. So it's not like I pulled some like magical trinket out of the air and look at me, voila, I'm smarter than everybody else. No, like we can all tell the Washington Commanders defense has gotten better at tackling here over the past couple of weeks specifically, but the past few weeks in totality. And that's going to be huge because you got Derrick Henry coming up. The Baltimore Ravens, you got Lamar Jackson, you got Zay Flowers, you got Isaiah Likely. These are guys that are hard to tackle for various reasons. Some of it's because of power, some of it's because of agility and their ability to read the field. This team is going to have its best tackling performance of the year coming up against the Baltimore Ravens. Because I don't know the stats right off the top of my head, but I would imagine that the Baltimore Ravens are able to create 8 missed tackles per game minimum against the best tackling teams in the NFL. So this is a week where the Washington Commanders defense, you've shown that improvement in the tackling game. It's got to show up again Sunday at M&T Bank Stadium against the Baltimore Ravens. So that's why I picked out that quote, because it's very, very indicative of what just happened against Cleveland. It's very, very important against what's going to happen against the Baltimore Ravens. And then the fan game ball insiders, every weekend we have a win. Insiders get to vote for a fan game ball of the week, and it went to one of the same guys that got a fan game ball from the team. I think it's going to happen pretty much every week, guys. We all kind of see the same thing, but Frankie Luvu is the one guy getting an insider voted fan game ball this weekend. 7 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hits, fumble recovery, played 95% of the defensive snaps. That's 59 snaps on the day, and he never lost a step. He played his final rep with as much energy as he played his first one. You'll love to see it. Frankie Luvu is a beast. Definitely showing out for you all in the stat box now, which I love as well. And so Frankie Luvu, our insider fan game ball of week 5. Hopefully we get to hand out another one in week 6. We are going to do a film review of the Washington Commanders win over the Cleveland Browns, and we're going to do a review of what we think we know about the Baltimore Ravens, all coming up tomorrow, leading into our crossover Thursday episode where Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens and I will break down this matchup, and Kevin will tell you what he actually knows about the Baltimore Ravens. So until then, if you've got questions or you've got comments and you want to reach out, talk to me, get more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, all you got to do is become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. We're getting new insiders every week, so come on over, be a part of that. Actually, a very small minority joining on the Insider Zooms, which is fine. Get out of it what you want to get out of it. But if you haven't joined an Insider Zoom yet, they're a lot of fun. I love the group that comes through pretty much every time, but always love seeing new members of the Insider group coming through as well. So don't be shy. Come on in. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. First up in the morning, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks you off with a double shot of NFL espresso. In the afternoon, roll through the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. And on Wednesday afternoon, you'll find me hanging out with Tony Wiggins in the afternoon. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. And until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind. And I will see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.